He never planned for his life to take a strange turn the day he walked past his neighbor's front window. It was late afternoon, and he had gone out to buy something small from a nearby store, nothing special. But as he passed by, he saw something that made him stop without thinking. An upright piano, old but beautiful in its own way. The neighbor's young child was tapping the keys with both hands, making random sounds that didn't mean much, yet the sight of the instrument itself grabbed his attention in a way he couldn't explain. He stood there for a moment, quietly watching, and for the first time in his life, he wondered what it would feel like to make music with his own hands. He had never taken music lessons. No one in his family played any instruments. Music was something he always admired from a distance, like a world other people belonged to. But seeing that piano made something inside him shift, as if a door in his mind opened a little. When he returned home, he couldn't stop thinking about it. He searched online out of curiosity, typing things like, how to play piano as a beginner, and how to learn piano at home. Countless videos appeared. People teaching scales, chords, songs, hand positions, everything. The thumbnails alone made him feel that maybe this was not impossible after all. Maybe he could learn a little, at least for fun. But there was a problem. He didn't have a piano. He didn't even have a small keyboard. Still, the thought refused to leave him. Every night after dinner, he found himself on YouTube watching tutorials even though he had no instrument to practice on. He watched people talk about finger exercises, how to relax the wrist, how to avoid common mistakes. He absorbed everything, memorized every tip. You would think it would be boring without actually being able to try anything, yet he felt excited, like he was discovering a secret world. Weeks passed like that, and the desire to try playing only grew stronger. One day, while scrolling through an online marketplace for used items, he found a listing for a free electronic keyboard. The post said the keys were uneven, some didn't play properly, and the speakers were weak. Most people would not want something like that, but for him it was more than enough. He messaged the person urgently. The next morning he went to pick it up. When he saw the keyboard, he realized it was in even worse shape than he imagined. Several keys were missing the plastic covers. Some were taped. The stand was broken, but he felt no disappointment. He saw it the way a beginner chef sees his first set of used knives, or a new painter sees a cheap canvas. It didn't matter how it looked. It mattered what it meant. He brought it home with the same excitement kids feel when they get their first bicycle. He set it on a small table and plugged it in. When the faint electronic hum came alive, he felt as if the world had given him a small chance. He pressed a key. It made a thin, shaky sound, but it was music to him. That night, he began practicing. He played simple scales he had memorized from videos, even though the keys felt uneven and some notes didn't respond well. His fingers were stiff. His timing was shaky, but he felt a warmth inside him that he had never felt before. A sense of doing something for himself, not for school, not for work, not for anyone else's expectations. Every night after finishing his responsibilities, he sat in front of that old keyboard. Sometimes the sound cut off in the middle of a scale. Sometimes a key got stuck. Sometimes he had to hit a note twice just to hear a faint tone. But he didn't stop. He didn't complain. He simply kept going. His family didn't understand what he was doing. They saw him hunched over that broken keyboard, headphones plugged in so he wouldn't disturb anyone. They assumed it was a phase, something he would eventually forget. They never said anything harsh, but the lack of encouragement was clear. They thought he was just wasting time. Outside the house, people didn't take him seriously either. Whenever he mentioned piano, someone would laugh softly and ask, "Are you really trying to learn from YouTube? Is that even possible?" He shrugged it off with a smile, but inside he felt a small sting every time. Still, he didn't argue or try to convince anyone. He simply practiced. His nights became a routine. Open the tutorial, watch carefully, pause, rewind, place fingers on keys, try again, try again, try again. He repeated simple lessons 100 times until his hands moved almost without thinking. After a few months, he noticed something strange. His fingers felt more natural. He could move between chords without freezing. He could play small melodies that actually sounded like songs. For the first time, he felt proud of himself. He felt like he was slowly building something with his own hands, something that belonged only to him. One evening, when he was practicing a simple tune from a tutorial he had watched dozens of times, he realized he wasn't thinking about the keys anymore. His hands were moving gently, almost confidently. He closed his eyes for a moment and listened. The melody floated out softly from the old speakers. It wasn't perfect, but it was full of heart. That night, he played the tune 3 times, then 5 times, then again just because he wanted to hear it. He felt a deep, quiet joy, the kind that doesn't need applause or audience. It was just him and the music. But learning alone wasn't always easy. Without a teacher, there were days when he felt lost. Some techniques looked simple in videos but felt impossible when he tried them. Sometimes he replayed a single explanation 20 times, still unsure if he understood it correctly. There were days when he felt stuck for hours trying to master a small part of a piece. Yet even on the hardest days he refused to quit. He reminded himself that everyone starts somewhere. Every pianist he admired had once been a beginner who didn't know where to place their fingers. The only difference was that they had teachers and he had YouTube. But to him, that didn't make the journey any less real. One day, something unexpected happened. While practicing, the keyboard suddenly stopped working. He pressed the power button. Nothing. He unplugged it and plugged it back in. Still nothing. For a moment, his heart sank. That old keyboard had been his only way to practice. Without it, how would he continue? He opened the back panel and found that some wires had loosened. He didn't know much about electronics, but he tried to fix them the best he could. After a few attempts, the keyboard flickered back to life. He let out a quiet laugh of relief. Moments like that reminded him how fragile his journey was. But maybe that was what made it meaningful. Nothing was guaranteed. Every bit of progress felt like something he had earned through pure persistence. As months turned into a year, he practiced more seriously. He didn't skip nights unless absolutely necessary. Even when he was tired, he spent at least 10 minutes practicing scales or reviewing a tutorial. He believed small, consistent effort was better than doing nothing. Slowly, something inside him changed. Piano was no longer a hobby. It became part of who he was. It became the one place where he felt calm, focused, and alive. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if he would ever play for an audience or if anyone would care about his journey. All he knew was that learning piano from YouTube had become a personal mission, something he wanted to pursue no matter what others thought. Every small improvement felt like a quiet victory. Every night of practice felt like a step forward. And even though most people still didn't take him seriously, he believed in the possibility that one day, his dedication might lead him somewhere he never imagined. At this stage, he had no idea how far this path would eventually take him. He didn't know that one day, the same people who laughed would be the ones talking about his achievements. All he knew was that music had entered his life unexpectedly, and he was holding on to it with everything he had. Part 1 ends here, with him practicing alone, unaware that this quiet beginning would someday turn into a story that would amaze people around the world. The more he practiced, the more he realized how much he still didn't know. Some days felt like tiny breakthroughs, but other days felt like slow sinking. His fingers sometimes refused to move the way he wanted. His mind understood the tutorials, yet his hands lagged behind. It was as if his ideas were running ahead while his skills walked slowly behind them. But what made things harder wasn't the music itself. It was people. His family didn't discourage him openly, but they made small comments here and there. Someone would say, "You should sleep earlier instead of staying up with that keyboard." Another person would mention, "Learning from videos isn't the same as learning from a real teacher." No one said he couldn't do it, yet every comment carried a quiet doubt. Outside home, things felt even more discouraging. When he talked about piano, people would raise their eyebrows like they found it amusing. Some said, "Seriously? You're learning from YouTube?" Others asked, "Why don't you take real lessons?" He wished he could afford them. He wished he had access to a proper music school. But he didn't, so he tried to learn in the way he could. He tried not to let their reactions bother him, but he couldn't help feeling a little embarrassed at times. He knew his keyboard was old and broken. He knew his technique was far from perfect. He knew people didn't understand what he was trying to do. Still, something inside him refused to give up. The more people doubted him, the stronger his desire grew to prove to himself that their doubts didn't define him. At night, he kept practicing. The room stayed dim except for the soft blue light from his keyboard. He played simple tunes over and over again until his hands ached. Sometimes he practiced until midnight, then forced himself to wake up early the next morning for his daily responsibilities. He wasn't perfect. Sometimes he grew frustrated. There were nights when he hit a wrong note again and again, until he felt like throwing his hands up in the air. He would pause, breathe deeply, and start again. He learned that piano wasn't just about talent or inspiration. It was about patience, mountains of patience. One evening, while he was practicing a song he had been working on for weeks, his cousin walked into the room. She listened for a moment, then laughed lightly and said, "Why do you keep doing this? You're not going to become a pianist like this." Her comment wasn't meant to be cruel, but it cut deeper than she knew. He didn't answer. He just kept playing after she left. But the melody suddenly felt heavier. When he went to sleep that night, he lay awake thinking about her words. Maybe she was right. Maybe learning from random videos wasn't enough. Maybe he was chasing something unrealistic. He turned off the light, closed his eyes, and whispered to himself, "Tomorrow will be better." It was something he often said when things felt difficult. It didn't guarantee anything, but it helped him breathe. The next morning, he woke up before sunrise. He hadn't planned to. He simply opened his eyes and felt a strange, quiet determination inside him. He sat down at the keyboard and practiced scales softly while everyone slept. The house was so silent that each note sounded like it echoed. And in that stillness, he understood something important. He wasn't doing this for praise. He wasn't doing it to impress anyone. He wasn't doing it because he believed it would lead to fame or success. He was doing it because something inside him came alive when he touched the keys. When he realized that, the frustration from the night before faded. The comments from others felt smaller. He decided that even if he only ever played in his small room on his old keyboard, it would still be worth it. Days passed, then weeks. He practiced whenever he could. He listened to songs repeatedly, trying to break them down into tiny parts he could learn. He learned how to slow videos to understand each movement. He studied the way pianists lifted their hands after striking a key, how they kept their arms relaxed, how their fingers curved naturally. Over time, his ears grew sharper. He could hear the difference between soft and loud notes. He could sense when his timing was off. He could recognize chords by sound. He didn't have any formal theory training, but he developed a kind of intuition that came from hours of listening and repeating. However, the criticism didn't stop. Whenever he played and someone overheard him, they made little comments about how it sounded okay but not professional. Others suggested he spend his time on something more realistic. Some teased him gently, not knowing that even jokes can sting when someone is trying hard. One afternoon at a family gathering, someone casually mentioned his piano practice. A few people chuckled and made remarks about his internet lessons. They said things like, "Next thing we know, he'll enter a big music competition." Their words were lighthearted and meant to be funny, but he felt the heat rising in his chest. He forced a smile to avoid looking sensitive, but inside, a storm was building. He wondered why people found it strange that someone could learn something on their own. Why was it so funny that he was trying? That night, he went back to his keyboard feeling both sad and stubborn. He sat down and placed his fingers on the keys, but instead of playing a melody, he held one long note. It sounded lonely, but in that moment he understood something new about himself. He didn't want to quit. Not because he wanted to prove others wrong, but because he felt that music was becoming a part of him. Letting it go would be like walking away from something that made his life brighter. He began practicing again, slowly at first, then with more energy. He played the same tune over and over again, almost like he was telling himself, "I am still here. I am still moving forward." Over the next few months, he worked harder than ever. He fixed parts of the keyboard with tape and glue to keep it functioning. He reorganized his schedule so he would always have time to practice. Even 10 minutes on a busy day felt better than nothing. At some point, something interesting started happening. Even though he didn't notice it immediately, others did. His music sounded cleaner. His hand movements looked smoother. The melodies he played were more recognizable. His timing improved. One evening, while he was practicing a soft piece, his younger brother walked in and said, "It actually sounds good." It was a simple comment, but it meant a lot. Then another day, a close friend visited and said, "You're improving. I didn't expect that." It wasn't meant as an insult, but it showed how low people's expectations had been. Even though these comments carried surprise, they still gave him a bit of confidence. He started to believe, not in a loud or arrogant way but quietly inside himself. However, despite his improvement, many challenges remained. There were pieces he wanted to learn but felt too complicated. Some videos went too fast for him to follow. Some skills seemed out of reach. Each time he failed to master something, he had to start from zero again. And every time someone laughed or questioned his efforts, a small crack formed inside him. But each time he sat down at the keyboard again, that crack slowly healed. What kept him going was simple. He still had a dream, even if he didn't fully understand what that dream was yet. He only knew that music mattered to him. And if something matters, giving up shouldn't be the first option. By the end of this period, he had developed a kind of resilience he never expected. The laughter, the doubts, the whispered jokes. They still hurt, but they no longer determined his path. He was learning to carry his passion quietly, without needing approval. He didn't realize it yet, but this inner strength would later become one of the most important parts of his journey. It would help him face challenges far greater than a broken keyboard or a careless comment. For now, he continued practicing in his small room, unaware that the music he was shaping in those late nights would someday travel further than he ever imagined. He didn't realize how much he had changed until one evening when he recorded himself playing. He had never recorded a full piece before. He usually practiced quietly, without thinking about how it sounded to anyone else. But that night, something inside him pushed him to capture his playing, maybe to see how far he had come. He set his phone on a makeshift stand he created from a stack of books and hit record. His hands trembled at first, even though no one was watching. He took a deep breath, placed his fingers on the keys, and began playing a melody he had been practicing for weeks. The performance wasn't flawless. A few notes came out uneven, and his timing slipped once or twice. But there were moments, brief but beautiful, where the music flowed smoothly. When he watched the video after playing, he felt a mixture of surprise and pride. He didn't sound perfect, but he sounded better than he expected. On impulse, he uploaded the video to a social media page where people often shared their hobbies. He didn't expect much from it. He thought maybe a friend or two might like the post. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He simply wanted to put something out into the world, something that represented the effort he had been quietly giving for so long. He went to sleep that night without thinking much about it. The next morning, when he checked his phone, he froze. The video had far more views than he expected. Dozens of comments appeared. Some people complimented his dedication. Others said they were surprised he had learned from YouTube. A few even asked him to post more videos. But among all the comments, one stood out. It was from a local music teacher who said his playing showed real potential. The teacher suggested he visit her studio so she could listen to him in person. He stared at the comment for a long time, unsure what to feel. It was the first time someone with real experience had taken him seriously. He wasn't sure if he should reply. Doubts crept into his mind. What if she listened to him and realized he wasn't good enough? What if she regretted offering help? But after thinking for a while, he gathered the courage to respond. They arranged a day for him to visit the studio. He felt nervous the entire week leading up to it. Every time he practiced, he imagined sitting in front of someone who actually understood music at a professional level. He worried she would notice every flaw, every weakness in his technique. When the day came, he wore simple clothes and carried nothing but a small notebook where he had written down pieces he had learned. His heart beat fast as he walked into the studio. The room smelled of polished wood and old sheet music. On one side stood a grand piano that looked almost majestic. The teacher greeted him kindly and asked him to play something he felt comfortable with. His hands shook as he sat down. He placed his fingers on the cool keys of the grand piano. Felt nothing like his old keyboard. The keys were smooth and heavy in a pleasant way. He started to play. He expected her to stop him quickly. He believed she would point out mistakes or tell him he wasn't ready. But she let him finish the whole piece. When he lifted his hands off the keys, he couldn't tell what she was thinking. Then she smiled. She told him he had a natural sense of expression, something teachers couldn't easily teach. She said his technique needed work, especially his wrist movements and hand strength, but those things could be improved with guidance. For the first time in his journey, he heard real encouragement from someone who truly understood music. Felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. The teacher offered to help him whenever she had free time. She explained that she couldn't give full lessons for free, but she was willing to guide him when possible because she saw potential in him. He agreed gratefully. Over the next few months, he visited the studio occasionally. The teacher corrected his posture, helped him understand dynamics, and taught him exercises he had never seen in online videos. Each session felt like unlocking a new level in a game. But he still relied heavily on YouTube tutorials for most of his practice. He combined everything he learned, the teacher's advice, online lessons, and his own instincts. His playing transformed faster than he expected. One afternoon, after listening to him play a challenging piece, the teacher said, "You should consider entering a small competition. Nothing big, just local. It would be a good experience." He felt both excitement and fear. A real competition? Him? He didn't answer right away. He mulled over the idea for days. A part of him felt thrilled, like a door he had never considered was suddenly open. Another part felt terrified. He had never played for a real audience. What if he failed? What if people laughed? Finally, after a long evening of thinking, he decided to try. Not because he believed he could win, but because he didn't want fear to decide his future. He registered for the competition. It was a small regional event where young musicians from various backgrounds would perform. He knew many of them had trained for years. Some had professional teachers, expensive instruments, and access to opportunities he could only dream of. But he reminded himself that this wasn't about comparison. It was about growth. He practiced intensively for weeks. The piece he chose was difficult enough to challenge him but simple enough for him to play with emotion. He played it every day until the notes felt like they were part of his heartbeat. The night before the competition, he barely slept. His mind ran through every possibility. What if he forgot the notes? What if he panicked? What if the judges noticed he was self-taught and dismissed him? The next morning, he arrived at the venue early. The building buzzed with activity. Young musicians warmed up in hallways, their fingers moving quickly across imaginary keyboards or violin strings. Parents and teachers discussed schedules. The atmosphere felt intense. He sat alone in a corner, holding a water bottle. His hands felt cold. His heartbeat felt loud in his ears. When it was finally his turn, he stepped onto the small stage. A grand piano stood in the center, surrounded by bright lights. The seats were filled with audience members, strangers whose expressions he couldn't read. He sat down. His hands hovered above the keys. For a moment he couldn't move. Then he closed his eyes. He remembered the first time he touched his broken keyboard. He remembered the nights he practiced silently while everyone slept. He remembered the discouraging comments, the laughter, the doubts. He remembered the teacher who believed in him, the strangers online who encouraged him, the version of himself who hadn't given up. He took a deep breath and played. He didn't play perfectly. He missed a note near the middle. His hands trembled slightly at the end. But the emotion in his playing filled the hall. People listened quietly, absorbed by the sincerity of each note. When he finished, there was a soft wave of applause. It wasn't thunderous, but it was real. And for him, it was enough. After all the performers finished, the judges announced the results. He didn't expect anything. He stood in the back of the hall, ready to clap for whoever won. To his shock, his name was called. He had placed among the top finalists. His heart jumped. He felt disbelief wash over him. He had never won anything in music before. For someone who learned from YouTube, This small recognition felt like winning a mountain. When he returned home, he placed the small certificate on his desk. It wasn't a trophy or a medal, but it represented something bigger, a step forward. He didn't know it yet, but that little certificate would lead him towards something far greater, something he hadn't even dreamed of at this point. The next morning arrived slowly, almost as if the sun itself was unsure how to rise after everything that had happened. The air outside was cool, with a soft breeze touching the windows as if it was trying to calm the house down. Inside, the mood was mixed with worry and determination. No one spoke much at first. Everyone seemed to be carrying their own thoughts, trying to make sense of what the previous days had shown them. They gathered again around the small table where they usually discussed everything. It had always been the center point of every plan, every fear, every surprise. And today was no different. Each person settled into their seat, looking at one another with quiet understanding. Even though no one said it out loud, everyone knew something had shifted. They were not just dealing with strange events anymore. They were dealing with something that felt connected to them in a deeper way. One of them finally broke the silence by talking about the sound they kept hearing each night. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to disturb sleep. It always happened around the same time, like a soft knock or a distant shuffle. They explained how it made them feel uneasy, like something wanted attention but didn't know how to ask. Another added that they had noticed the doors creaking lightly, not because of wind, but almost like someone brushing past them. They all listened carefully, absorbing the details. No one laughed, no one doubted. They had seen enough to know that every little detail mattered now. They began discussing what they should do next. Ignoring things clearly wasn't helping, and running from the problem didn't feel right either. They agreed that they needed to face whatever was happening, but do it calmly and safely. Someone suggested checking each room again during daylight, taking notes, and trying to see if anything had changed since the night before. The idea made sense. Daytime felt safer. Sunlight always made things less scary, giving them confidence to look more closely. So they stood up together, ready to begin the inspection. They moved slowly from one room to the next. The first room looked exactly the same as before. The floor was clean, the curtains were steady, and nothing seemed out of place. But the second room felt different the moment they stepped inside. The air was slightly heavier, as if someone had recently been there. One of them pointed out the small marks on the surface of the desk. They weren't scratches, just faint lines that hadn't been there earlier. The third room felt quiet, too quiet. Even though the others didn't feel anything unusual, one person kept glancing at the corner near the window. They couldn't explain it, but something about that corner bothered them. Maybe it was the shape of the shadow or the way the light fell unevenly. They decided to note it down anyway. Every feeling counted. They continued to check the hallway afterward. That was when they found something unexpected. A small object lay near the wall, something none of them recognized. It wasn't shiny or expensive looking. It was just a simple piece of wood, carved with thin lines that formed a pattern. They examined it closely, trying to figure out whether it belonged to someone in the house. No one claimed it. The object felt warm when touched, which confused them even more. It wasn't sunny in that part of the house, and nothing else nearby was warm. They exchanged uncertain looks, each quietly thinking the same thing. This object didn't just appear by accident. One of them carefully wrapped it in cloth and placed it on the table so they could study it later. After finishing the inspection, they sat down again to talk about what they had seen. Each person shared their thoughts honestly. They didn't want to jump to conclusions, but they also didn't want to dismiss what they observed. The small wooden piece seemed to interest everyone the most. The pattern looked old, and the lines almost felt familiar, like something they had seen somewhere but couldn't remember when. The rest of the afternoon went by slowly. The day seemed unusually long, stretching out as if time was waiting for them to make the next move. They tried to stay busy, but their minds kept drifting back to the strange events. Every sound in the house made them pause for a second. Every shift in the wind made them listen more carefully. As evening approached, they decided to stay together again, just like the night before. No one wanted to feel alone. They turned on a small light in the room so the darkness wouldn't swallow them whole. It wasn't bright, but it was enough to give them comfort. They placed the wooden object in the center of the table. The warm glow from the lamp made its lines look sharper, almost alive. They stared at it in silence for a while. One of them suggested that maybe the object was a sign, something that could help them understand what was happening. Another wondered if it belonged to someone from the past, someone who might still be connected to the place. As they talked, a soft sound echoed from the hallway. It wasn't loud, just a tiny shift, like something brushing against the wall. They froze for a moment, listening closely. The sound happened again, this time a bit clearer. It wasn't threatening, but it definitely wasn't random. They stood up slowly, not wanting to panic. Together, they walked toward the hallway, each step careful and quiet. When they reached the corner, they didn't see anything unusual. The hallway looked the same as always. But something felt different. The air was slightly colder, enough to make their skin tingle. One of them called out softly, not expecting an answer but hoping for clarity. Of course, no voice responded. But the cold feeling lingered for a few seconds before fading away. They looked at each other, unsure of what it meant. Back in the room, they sat again. Their breaths were calmer now, but their minds were racing. The sound, the coldness, the mysterious object. They were all pieces of a puzzle they hadn't solved yet. But instead of fear, something new began to form among them. Curiosity. They knew they had a choice. They could continue being scared of what they didn't understand, or they could try to learn more. They chose the second option. They decided that the next day they would explore the history of the house, maybe visit the old library nearby, and speak to people who might know more. Before going to sleep, they talked a little more about supporting each other. Whatever was happening wasn't something any one person should face alone. They promised to stay united, to share everything, and to move step by step. As they finally lay down to rest, the house felt calm, almost peaceful. Maybe it was because they had stopped running from the unknown. Maybe the presence they felt had softened. Or maybe the night itself wanted to give them a moment of quiet. The wooden object stayed on the table, glowing faintly under the soft light. None of them noticed the way its lines shimmered in the dark or how it seemed to hum with the quiet energy of something waiting to be understood. But tomorrow would bring new answers, new questions, and new steps in a journey they never expected to take. He stepped into the next stage of his journey with a mix of excitement and fear, not knowing what waited for him but still holding on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, his effort would finally pay off. The day he received the message about the regional competition, he read it again and again, as if his eyes needed time to believe what they were seeing. It felt unreal, almost like a dream he had no intention of waking up from. He couldn't tell if he was more nervous or grateful, but one thing was clear in his heart. This was his chance to prove to himself that his dedication was not a waste. He woke up earlier than usual every day, even before the sun rose. The house was silent at that hour and he liked it that way. It felt like the world had paused just to give him a space where he could breathe, think, and practice. He sat in front of his old keyboard, the same one with taped edges and buttons that sometimes refused to work, but it didn't bother him. He ran his fingers softly across the keys, warming up with scales he had learned from countless online videos. He wasn't perfect. His fingers slipped sometimes, and there were moments when his rhythm fell apart. He knew very well that others had the support of trained teachers, music schools, and expensive instruments. But he had something else, hours and hours of self-driven practice, and a stubborn belief that if he kept going, he would eventually make it. His online mentor, the music teacher who had reached out to him after watching his video, sent him short voice notes whenever he found time. The notes weren't long, but each one helped him fix something important. His hand posture, the timing of a difficult passage, the way he needed to control his breathing while playing. They didn't meet often, but those little pieces of guidance worked like sunlight on a plant that had been growing in the dark. As the days passed, he began to sense a quiet shift inside himself. His movements became more confident, his playing clearer, and the shaken feeling he used to get whenever someone watched him started to fade. He still had a long way to go, but he wasn't the same anxious person who had once doubted whether his YouTube trained skills were worth anything. When the day of the regional competition finally arrived, He felt his heart pounding so loudly that he thought the entire room could hear it. He wore the best shirt he owned, which wasn't anything fancy, but it made him feel neat and presentable. His hands were cold, and he kept rubbing them together to calm himself. The venue was larger than he imagined, decorated with banners and filled with families, teachers, and young musicians carrying instruments in shiny cases. He looked around and saw kids talking confidently with their instructors, some practicing in corners, some with printed sheet music squeezed under their arms. He stood there quietly, clutching nothing but belief. When he checked in at the registration desk, the person looked at him, then at the sign-in form, and asked politely, "Where is your instructor?" He froze for a second, then gently replied, "It's just me." The person nodded without judgment, but he couldn't help feeling a sting inside. He walked back to a quiet corner near the wall and tried to steady himself. He closed his eyes for a moment, reminding himself that he belonged here just as much as anyone else. When his turn came, he walked toward the stage with slow steps, each one heavier than the last. The lights felt bright, almost too bright, and the judges sat behind a table, pens ready, faces unreadable. He sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and placed his fingers on the cool keys. For a few seconds, everything around him melted away. The audience, the judges, the pressure. He remembered the late nights, the broken keyboard, the online tutorials that became his silent teachers, and the small but powerful encouragement from the one mentor who believed he had potential. Then he began to play. The first few notes came out soft, almost hesitant, but soon his hands found their rhythm. His heart followed the flow of the melody, and the world in front of him slowly blurred into a peaceful haze. It didn't feel like he was performing. It felt like he was sharing a piece of himself, something he had kept hidden for years. The music carried the story of his struggle, his lonely practice sessions, and his unspoken dreams. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then a soft wave of applause rose from the audience. It wasn't the loudest applause of the day, but to him, it sounded like a mountain had moved. He didn't win first place at the regional level, but he earned something bigger, recognition. One of the judges approached him afterward, shook his hand and said, "You have something rare. You don't play like someone trained traditionally, but you play with honesty. Keep going." Those words stayed with him for days. The surprising part came later, when he received an email saying he had qualified for the next level because of his unique performance style and emotional depth. It didn't matter that he didn't take the top spot. The judges saw potential, and that was enough. The news spread in his area, and so did the reactions. Some people were shocked. Others laughed quietly, saying things like, "He thinks he's going to go further?" Or, "How far can YouTube even take him?" Critics, especially those near him, didn't hold back their opinions. They said he didn't stand a chance at the national level, let alone an international one. They joked openly, saying professional pianists would crush him in seconds. Their words hurt, but they didn't break him. In fact, something inside him grew stronger. He spent the next few weeks practicing harder than he ever had. His fingers sometimes ached, and there were days when he felt mentally drained, but he kept going. If a piece felt too difficult, he slowed it down. If a technique confused him, he replayed online tutorials again and again until something clicked. His old keyboard almost gave up during this time, keys sticking and sounds fading, but he managed with what he had. When it finally stopped working, someone from his community, who had quietly admired his dedication, gifted him a used upright piano. It wasn't new, but to him it felt like the most beautiful thing in the world. Practicing on a real piano changed everything. The sound was richer, the touch deeper, and he began discovering new layers in his playing. His mentor helped him choose pieces suitable for the competition, and though the sessions were still short and rare, every tip mattered. He stood in front of the mirror some nights, imagining the stage, imagining the audience, imagining the judges. He tried to picture himself playing without fear. Not to win, but to show what he had become. By the time the national level event approached, he felt something new inside. A steady calmness mixed with purpose. He wasn't fully confident, but he wasn't scared either. He knew he had grown. He knew he had earned his place. When he arrived at the national venue, people around him still had their doubts. Some whispered, some stared, some simply smiled politely, unsure what to think of someone who learned from online videos. But he didn't let any of that shake him. He walked onto the stage again, remembering the long journey behind him, the laughter he had heard, the criticism he had endured, and the belief he had fought so hard to keep alive. As he placed his fingers on the piano once more, he promised himself that no matter the result, he would play with the same heart that brought him this far. That moment marked the beginning of something bigger, something beyond what anyone expected, including himself. He had no idea how much his life was about to change as he stepped into the hall for the international competition. Everything around him felt larger than life. The stage was wider, the lights brighter, and the audience far bigger than anything he had ever faced before. Even the sound of people talking in the seats created a kind of pressure that settled on his shoulders. For a moment, he wondered if he truly belonged here, among musicians who had trained since childhood under masters and in prestigious music schools. But he reminded himself of how far he had come. He wasn't the same boy who once sat with a damaged keyboard and shaky hands. He was someone who had grown through countless hours of practice, someone who had fought through doubt and criticism, someone who pushed himself because he believed in the dream that lived quietly in his heart. As he waited backstage, he watched other performers walk in and out with confidence. Some had their teachers with them, giving last-minute advice. Some had families cheering them on. Some carried expensive sheet music or whispered complicated technical terms. He stood alone, his hands crossed in front of him, trying not to let nervousness take over. His heart raced whenever a new performer stepped onto the stage, reminding him that his turn was getting closer and closer. He tried to breathe slowly, focusing on the simple rhythm that had helped him through tough moments before. The sound of applause from the audience made him jump slightly. Someone had just finished their piece. That meant he was next. A staff member approached him and said softly, "You're up." He nodded, though his throat felt tight. He walked toward the stage entrance, his steps slow but steady. When he reached the edge of the curtains, he looked out at the vast room filled with people from different countries, different backgrounds, all waiting to hear something remarkable. His legs felt weak, but he refused to turn back. He walked onto the stage, each step echoing faintly in the silent hall. When he reached the piano, he paused. It was a beautiful grand piano, polished enough to reflect the lights above. He gently placed his fingers on the edge of it and took a deep breath. He sat down, settling himself into position. The bench felt different from the ones he had used before, firmer, more official. He closed his eyes briefly, blocking out everything except the memory of why he was here. He thought of the long nights, the online tutorials, the failures, the improvements, the unexpected support, and the quiet hope that had driven him through every challenge. Then he began to play. The first note filled the hall with a soft, warm sound. It felt like a wave washing through the silence. The melody grew, rising and falling with emotion. His hands moved with more certainty than they ever had before. Every piece of guidance from his mentor, every bit of effort he put into controlling his breathing, every hour spent practicing rhythm, came together in that moment. He didn't play to impress. He didn't try to match the technical perfection of others. He simply played with the truth of his own journey. His music didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded lived. As the piece progressed, he poured everything he had into it. The loneliness, the frustration, the determination, the moments he almost gave up, and the moments he realized he couldn't. His fingers danced softly, then powerfully, then softly again, like the story of someone who had grown through struggle and found meaning in every step. When he reached the final note, it rang beautifully through the hall before fading into silence. For a moment he kept his head down, almost scared to look up. He didn't know how the audience had reacted. He didn't know if the judges thought he was good enough. But then he heard it. Applause. Not light applause. Not polite applause. A wave of applause that grew louder and louder, sweeping through the hall like a rising tide. He lifted his head slowly and saw the audience standing, clapping with genuine enthusiasm. He stared at them with disbelief, his heart pounding for a completely different reason now. Some people were smiling warmly. Some looked surprised. Some even looked emotional. He tried to take in the moment, but it felt unreal, like something out of a dream. After leaving the stage, he stood in the hallway for a moment, leaning against the wall as he tried to calm himself. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the overwhelming rush of everything he had just experienced. Performers and visitors passed by, some nodding at him, some complimenting him softly. One of the judges approached him quietly and said, "Your playing had a soul that can't be taught. Comes from real experience. You should be proud." He thanked the judge, though his voice shook a little. He couldn't believe he was hearing these words about his playing that had once been mocked and dismissed. When the results were finally announced, he stood with the other competitors, his heart thumping with each name called. The announcer listed third place, then second. He felt his breath grow unsteady. Then the hall fell silent. And the winner of this year's international competition is... A pause. A long, heavy pause that made his heart nearly stop. The self-taught pianist whose performance moved every judge. They said his name. He froze. For a second, his mind couldn't process the words. People around him clapped, some even turning to smile at him. He slowly stepped forward, stunned, almost numb. When he reached the stage and accepted the award, the hall lit up with applause once again. He had done it. The boy who learned piano through YouTube videos. The boy who had a broken keyboard. The boy who had been laughed at. The boy who had faced criticism at every step. That same boy now stood as the winner of an international competition. News spread faster than he imagined. Headlines appeared online calling him the self-taught sensation and the unexpected champion who beat the odds. People from around the world sent messages saying his journey inspired them. Some said his story gave them hope to chase their own dreams, no matter how impossible they seemed. He didn't let the attention change him. He went back home, greeted the same way he used to be, but with a new warmth in the eyes of those who greeted him. Many people who once doubted him now congratulated him sincerely. Some even apologized for laughing at his dreams. He accepted their words kindly, knowing that he had grown through all of it. As his life moved forward, opportunities began appearing. Invites to perform, offers from music schools, collaborations, interviews, and events. But he never forgot the truth of where he started. He kept the old keyboard in his room, the one with taped edges, as a reminder that greatness doesn't always begin in the brightest places. He continued practicing every day, not because he wanted more awards, but because playing the piano had become a part of who he was. It was the language his heart spoke best. His story became a reminder that sometimes people don't need perfect conditions or traditional training to reach their dreams. Sometimes belief, persistence, and a little bit of courage can take a person farther than anyone expects. And whenever he sat at a piano now, he felt a quiet joy, knowing that the music he played wasn't just sound. It was the proof of a journey shaped by struggle, hope, and an unshakable desire to grow.